Heading into the 3.28 PoE League, I will be playing Wintertide brand Elementalist despite the nerfs. The build is fine and is a viable League starter all the way through the endgame. If you are unfamiliar with Wintertide brand, this skill has okay clear and bossing with it is very easy because of its playstyle and visual clarity. With this skill, I have farmed Ubers in SSF, I have dot capped in Trade League. I don't think the skill has single target damage issues. I think because of how the skill functions, it might have fewer good scaling options, but I do not think that it has damage scaling issues through the endgame. Now, if you hate dot builds, if you hate brands, if you hate delayed damage, or if you just prefer playing, the strongest flavor of the month build of a league, this build is probably not for you, and I'm not going to convince you otherwise. But if you are looking for an all-content viable Wintertide brand build or setup, you're in the right place. For Ascendancy, my recommendation is that for SSF, play Occultist, and for Trade League, play Elementalist. I say this because Occultist Ascendancy has a good mix of damage, defense, and utility, which is what you need in SSF because you can't just trade to solve all your problems. For example, let's looking at Occultist, you get to click on damage, freeze immunity, a lot of ES, stun immunity, and then more damage or explosions. For Elementalist, you get to click on damage, and then damage. Why is this better in softcore? Well, in softcore, the meta is to progress to the next level of content as quickly as possible, and to do so, you need to be able to reach the next damage check. So the faster you progress, the more currency you earn, which you can use to trade to solve your defense issues. This is not to say that you cannot play Occultist in Trade or Elementalist in SSF, this is just my opinion of what I would do. Also, since they are both switch classes, you can just change ascendancies at any time, so the decision is not really binding. Now, as for the patch notes, there was a nerf to golems and golem stacking. The thing is that golem stacking was broken not because of the golem buff effect on priority or bond, but because when you put a Dark Monarch helmet on, you double your golem, so you get like 12 golems, and each primordial bond gives you 120% increased damage. So when I put the nerf into PoB, the Golem Stacker endgame build that I played last league only loses about like 13% damage. Now here's the thing though, however much damage is being lost from this golem nerf is probably being made up with the ability to corrupt your main skill to add an additional gem link. So honestly, if you think about it, these two changes net to zero for Elementalist and is a buff for Occultist, because nothing else changed for Occultist. The change I'm running into the most trouble on is the change regarding exceptional gems. Previously, all Path of Exile builds in the game cap around Awakened gems, and Wintertide brand is no exception. They're now removed, and they're being replaced with exceptional gems, which we do not have any info on, and then GGG is not going to release any info until they're actually not going to release any info at all. So honestly, I don't even know what my 6-link setup is going to be. I expect the new exceptional gems to work like the current Enlighten, Empower, and Enhance gems, where level 3 is the base level cap, but let's be honest, if you're using, let's say, like an Empower in your 6-link, you are not really looking to cap around Empower 3, you're probably looking at an Empower 4. So honestly, we won't even know what the level scaling is until like the wiki gets updated. And honestly, there even exists a world where there just aren't very many good exceptional gems for Wintertide brand, and then, that's like an indirect nerf, but we will see. With that in mind, I'm going to give you a general progression guide from a fresh start to a potential endgame setup. I'm not going to hold your hand and go over everything because we're going to be here for hours. Instead, I'm going to try to give you the highlights and go over the most important breakpoints. And then for the other small details, you'll be able to follow the tree corresponding gear and gem setups in the PoB in the description. Anyways, for the campaign, start with a standard rolling magma setup. After you reach the Cavern of Anger in Act 1, return to town and buy Wintertide brand. This is the earliest that you can switch to Wintertide brand, and I recommend that you start using Wintertide brand as soon as possible because it is very strong immediately and basically is strong for the rest of the campaign. The goal by the end of Act 10 is to 4-link both Wintertide brand and Cold Snap, and then collect all the other gems along the way. After the campaign, you are going to play a life-based setup through Eater and Exarch, which is now your first Watchstone, Voidstone. Your goal before then is to get a 6-link as soon as possible. More links, more damage, pretty self-explanatory here. You also need to look for a shield with high increased chance to block to deal with attacks. I would try to identify every shield that's rare that you can equip, and then your weapon should ideally have 3 relevant stats, one of which must be cast speed. For the flask setup, I would recommend always running 2 life flasks, one of which is unconditionally instant recovery, and the other one is instant if you are below 50% HP. and then one of these needs to remove bleeding on use. Make sure that you also take the Rizlava Minor Pantheon. One of the utility flasks also needs to give freeze immunity until you get freeze immunity through Brine King. Now, if you have all of these accomplished, it should be pretty smooth sailing for the first Void Stone. For the remaining Void Stones 2 to 4, you should think about swapping the low life setup as soon as possible. Unfortunately, if you want to do damage, low life is kind of non-negotiable because you get 30% more damage from Pain Attunement, and then you get another like 20% from another aura. The most important component of this ES-based setup is the Recover ES on Block Shield. Because I don't expect you to have like a perfect shield on League Start, what I'm recommending you do is just buy any shield that has the ES Recovery mod with an open prefix, and then just benchcraft 50% increased chance to block. Additional sources of attack block you can consider are like a small cluster jewel that gives you 10%. You can anoint Testudo, which is the cheapest block anoint, gives another 10%, and then you can get like a chest implicit with another 5%. And then your spell block should be pretty easy to cap because of where you start on the passive tree. For the low life setup itself, you need a Brutal Restraint Timeless Rule with a dedication to Balbala. It has to be Balbala because you need to get the Trader Keystone. The breakpoints for the flasks are very specific to get 100% uptime. You need a belt with at least 30% increased flask effect duration. And then for your flasks, your Bismuth flask needs to have at least 47% increased charge recovery, and then Beastcraft bleed immunity on it, so you have permanent corrupted blood and bleed immunity. For the Quicksilver, you also need at least 47, actually 48, and then you benchcraft regen. And then all the flasks should have 20% quality, and then you should enchant with use when charges are full. Do not enchant with reuse at the end of flask effect because it's bugged. You also need to take this wheel on the passive skill tree in order to sustain your flasks, which is replaced with a flask-related medium cluster jewel later on. As soon as you correctly swap to a low life setup, you're going to have a very, very noticeable increase to damage, and you're going to have no problems getting your remaining Void Stones. This is why I recommend switching to low life as soon as possible, as soon as you can afford the gear. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, there's still going to be a lot of uncertainty of how the endgame setup is going to look like, just because we're still missing a lot of information, of what gear and gems are going to be finalized as. But I made an example endgame setup for reference. My line of thinking is that no matter what happens, you're still going to need like a good recover on block shield. You're going to need like a high ES chest armor. You're going to be running Ashes of the Stars because it's best in slot by like a wide margin. And you're going to need a nice weapon. I think that this is a pretty solid core target setup to work towards, as we are still, trying to figure out all the tools that this league has to offer, including the new exceptional gems, and what your potential endgame setup is going to look like. One of these potential setups is going to be a Golem Stacker setup that I played last league. As I mentioned before, the damage is going to look more or less the same because any loss in damage from the Golem nerfs is going to be offset by just being able to 7-link your Wintertide brand. So I expect Wintertide brand Golem setups to be still very solid, and honestly, it's probably going to be a lot cheaper because I think less people are going to play it because of the nerfs. Since I already played a Golem Stacker last league, this league I'm going to try something different without Golem Stacking, but honestly, I don't really know how the final version is going to look. In any case, I always recommend going to PoE Ninja ladder to search for a Wintertide brand to see what other people are doing for potential inspiration. If you want to see what I'm doing, you can try to find a profile that's under my name. Also, since we're here, for reference, the DPS that you see on PoE Ninja, this is the one-stage Wintertide brand DPS with no configs enabled, which is obviously very far from what your accurate DPS is. To correctly calculate your Wintertide brand DPS, first you need to change the stage count to average, because this correctly incorporates all investments to damage, cast speed, and duration. And then in configs, you need to tick all the boxes that are reasonably correct to tick, and then change the enemy type to a pinnacle boss. The number that shows in POB will be the average damage for one brand, since you will have 3 brands attached to an enemy with 1 Wintertide brand secondary debuff active. Your full true average DPS is calculated by multiplying this number by 4. But I digress. That's about all I have to say regarding a Wintertide brand potential league starter. I really do think it's a solid above average skill. It's just not so obviously broken that it attracts tourism, if you know what I'm saying. If you have any questions or if you run into any issues, you can feel free to leave a comment down below. But otherwise, good luck at League Start.